So today I want to walk you through something that honestly changed how I work with OpenCode, and that's the skill feature. Now, if you have been using OpenCode for a while, you probably noticed that sometimes you end up writing the same instruction over and over again, right? Like maybe you have a specific way you want your code documented or particular workflow for handling database migration. Well, that's exactly what Skills solves, and I'm going to show you how to set it up from scratch and actually use it in your projects. Alright, so let me start by explaining what skills actually are. Think of them as reusable instruction set that your e-agent can pull in whenever it needs them. Instead of loading everything into your initial prompt and bloating your context window, skills sit on the side and the agent discovers them when relevant. It's kind of like having a library of specialized playbook that the agent knows about, but only reads when necessary. The cool part is that OpenCode supports skills natively now as of latest version, so you don't need any plugin or third-party tools anymore. Now, before we jump into creating skills, let me show you where OpenCode actually looks for them. There are basically three locations you can use. First, you have got your project-specific skills, which lives inside the .opencode/skills folder in your current project. These are great for project-specific workflows, like if you are working on the React app and you have specific component patterns. Second, there is the global skill location, which can be placed at this path. These are the global skills you want available across all your projects, like maybe a general code review checklist or a documentation style guide. And finally, OpenCode also supports cloud-compatible skills from the .cloud/skills folder, which is nice if you are migrating from Cloud Code or want to share skills between both tools. One thing that's super important is to understand how discovery works. When OpenCode starts up, it walks through your directory structure, starting from your current working directory and searches upward until it hits the Git work tree boundary. Along the way, it collects any skills it finds in those .open or .cloud folders. Then it also grabs your global skills from that config directory I mentioned. The key thing here is that all discovered skills become available to all agents by default. But don't worry, because we can control access using permissions, which I will show you in a bit. Alright, let's actually create our first skill. I'm going to make something practical that you might actually use. Let's say we want a skill that helps with EP endpoint documentation. So first, I need to create the folder structure. I will navigate to my project root and create .opencode/skill/ep-docs. Notice that folder name, ep-docs. That's going to be our skill name. Now inside that folder, I need to create a file called skill.md. And that has to be all caps because OpenCode specifically looks for that file name. Now here is where it gets important. Every skill needs to start with the YAML front method, and there are specific fields that OpenCode recognizes. The two required ones are name and description. The name field must match your folder name exactly. So in this case, it's ep-docs. And there are some rules for naming too. Your skill name has to be lowercase, alphanumeric with single hyphen as a separated. No consecutive hyphens, and it cannot start or end with the hyphen. Basically, it needs to match this pattern. Start with a letter or number, then any combination of letter numbers add single hyphens. The description field is also required, and it needs to be between 1 and 1024 characters. This description is actually really important because it's what the agent sees when deciding whether to load your skill, so make it clear and specific. So let me write out the ep-docs skills. After the front method, I will write the actual instruction. I'm going to tell it to generate comprehensive AP documentation, including endpoint paths, HTTP method, request and responsive schemas, authentication requirements, and example request. I will also specify that it should follow REST API best practices and include error code documentation. The beauty here is that I can make these instructions as detailed as I want because they only get loaded when the agent actually uses the skill. Now, let's talk about how the agent actually discovered and used these skills. When you start an OpenCode session, the agent does not immediately load all your skills. Instead, OpenCode injects a description of available skills into the skill tool. The agent sees something like available skills, only the name and the description maybe. The full content stays out of the context until the agent decides it needs that skill and calls the tool. So you might see the agent execute something like skill with name ep-docs, and that's when the full instruction set gets loaded. Now here is something cool. You can actually reference other files or script from within your skills. For example, in my DB migration skill, I could tell the agent to look at a bash script that validate migration files or reference a Python script that handle data transformations. The skill content can guide the agent to execute specific commands or reference specific files in your project structure. Let's talk about permissions now, because this is where you really get control over your skills. By default, all skills are available to all agents and they load immediately when requested. But you can change that behavior in your OpenCode.json file. You add a permission section with a skill subsection, and then you can set patterns. For example, you might say internal -- equals deny to hide all skills that start with internal from your agents. Or you could set experimental -- equals ask to make the user confirm before loading any experimental skills. And you can use the asterisk wildcard to set a default like asterisk equals allow. Now what if you want different agents to have different permissions? OpenCode lets you override the global settings per agent. For custom agent, there you define yourself. You add a permission section right in the agent's front method with your skill permission. For built-in agents like the plan agent, you configure it in your OpenCode.json under the agent section. So you might have the plan agent with its own permission block that allow internal skills even though they are denied globally. You can also completely disable the skills tool for specific agent if they should not be using skills at all. For custom agents, you set tool skills as false in the front method, and for built-in agents, you put it in the OpenCode.json under the agents tool section. When the skill tool is disabled, the available skill section does not even appear in the agent's context, so it has no idea skills exist. Now let's address some common issues you might run into. First, if your skill is not showing up at all, double check that your file is named skill.md in all caps. OpenCode is case sensitive about this. Second, make sure your front method include both the name and description field and that the name matches your full name exactly. Third, check that your skill names are unique across all locations, because if you have two skills with the same name, OpenCode might not handle it gracefully. And fourth, verify your permissions, because if you have set or deny permission for a pattern that matches your skill, it won't appear to the agent even though it's technically discovered. If you are configuring permissions in your OpenCode.js and the indentation is off, OpenCode might silently ignore your setting and default to allowing all skill. I learned this in a hard way, so make sure your JSON is properly formatted, and if you are not sure, run it through a validator. Another thing to keep in mind is context management. Even though skills load on demand, if you create skills with massive amount of content, you can still blow up your context window once they are loaded. So try to keep your skills focused and concise. If you have a complex workflow, consider breaking it into multiple smaller skills that can be loaded independently rather than one giant skill that does everything. You can also use skills to inject domain-specific knowledge. Maybe you are working in a specialized field like financial modeling or scientific computing where there are specific conventions and calculations. You can create skills that provide that domain knowledge so that agent understand the context and requirement without you having to explain it every time. Here is a pro tip. If you are working on a team, consider creating a shared skill repository that everyone can pull from. You could have a company GitHub repo with approved skills from common tasks, and team members can clone it into their global skills directory. This ensures consistency across the team. Alright, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.